So I want to talk about my experience with Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them. So, and I think to be honest with you, I think my fascination with it all started as a kid, thanks to my dad. My dad had his own experience with Bigfoot. I should say, he would never say that it was Bigfoot because I don't think my dad wanted to be called crazy. He would always say that he didn't know what it was, that it was simply enormous, and it wasn't a bear. But as a kid, my dad grew up in a town called Galples, Ohio. Now, Galples is right across the river from a very infamous town in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Now, for everyone who knows Point Pleasant, West Virginia, you know that it is associated with the Mothman. To be honest with you, there's a lot of weird stuff going on down there. Not just the Mothman, but the Mothman kind of overshadows everything. But that being said, back then there was nothing in Galples, so a lot of times kids had to make their own fun. A lot of times that was pretty much just hunting, trapping, fishing, etc. So as it goes, my dad and my uncle were heading out real early in the morning to check the traps, and it was a foggy day. And the terrain there is very hilly. That's the best way I can describe it. Almost mountainous to some. But they were cresting a hill and looking down to a valley where there was a creek. And as the fog was moving through and the visibility was clearing up, they could see something standing there. Now, they asked each other, like, what the hell is that? And they're like, I don't know. What is it? And they became so terrified that they ended up leaving their traps. And I would ask my dad, like, how do you know it was so huge? And he would always say, well, it was standing next to a 4-foot fence, and the 4-foot fence struck it at the knees. So, if that tells you anything. But that's kind of, ever since then, that's where my fascination, like, was really, really peaked. And you would always hear stories, even locally, about people seeing it, but you kind of assumed that it was only in really, really rural areas. But as the prominence of the internet and the BFRO and sighting reports became more prevalent, you would see that there's more sightings in places that would be considered less rural. Now, for me, I became friends with a lot of people in the Bigfoot community, primarily two guys named Mike and Mike of the Ohio Night Stalkers. Mike and Mike decided they wanted to take me to the research area, which is also in a rural part of Ohio. Now, the terrain there was really, really similar to Galples, lots of hills, lots of woods. And we took a road up onto the side of this hill, and just complete darkness, other than the moonlight in the sky. And I mean, you could see every star in the sky. And as we got out, I had night vision on, and I could see pretty well. These guys didn't. And they could see, I felt like they could see better than I could walking around out there the way they were traversing the area. But as we got out, I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. And for anybody who knows that feeling, it's a very eerie feeling, especially when you're in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere. But as we started moving around up there, we heard what I can only describe as like a frog or something pretending to be a frog, doing a frog impression. As we would move towards that spot, it would stop, and then it would start up behind us. Now, as we move towards that one, it would stop, and then it would start up behind us again. So it was like we were being ping-ponged. Eventually, we started getting pelted with rocks, and these rocks were coming from the side of the hill, like it was actually being thrown up and over. Eventually, we decided we were going to go down to the valley, and we were going to do some calls. Now, we moved down to this valley where there's a road that actually moves in between these two enormous hills, and we decided we were going to do a call in the direction of where we just came. Now, as we were doing that, keep in mind there is a hill immediately behind us that is covered, tree line starts, and covered in heavy foliage. Now, they start doing their calls and getting a response. Now, I'd never heard this in person before, so I was pretty amazed. And it sounded, the best way I could describe it is like the Ohio House, for anyone who's familiar with that. And out of nowhere, it felt like a boulder was dropped right behind me. And it freaked me out. And I don't get scared that easily anymore. I turn, and like I said before, I had night vision on. And the woods were so thick behind me that I couldn't see anything. But it felt like a boulder landed behind me. I immediately went to the guys and I asked them, hey, did you feel that? Because it shook the ground. And eventually I started having everybody jump up and down trying to recreate that feeling that I couldn't. So immediately I feel even more nervous knowing that something could be standing just in the wood line watching me, big enough to shake the ground. And that was just one time. I think I'm going to have to tell you more some other time. Thanks for sticking around and listening to this story. If you like what you heard, hit like, subscribe. Also, check out some of my sponsors too. The Beard Struggle and Black Magic Supplements. Use these promo codes. Save some money. Later.